Today, we're jumping straight into some source material, focusing on excerpts about a pretty aggressive federal action.
Yeah, this is the directive from Attorney General Pam Bondi, aimed squarely at protests outside ICE facilities.
Right, and our mission here is a quick, close look at this order, what it actually said, which agencies got involved, the reasons given.
And importantly, the legal tools she wanted used against protesters.
So the sources really show a definite shift in escalation in the federal response.
Absolutely. It's a move from, localized clashes, things like tear gas, rubber bullets, to a much bigger, coordinated federal deployment.
And how this was communicated is key, too, right? Not just internal.
Exactly. It wasn't just a quiet memo. It was codified in a high-level document and announced publicly on X. So centralizing this crackdown.
That formal directive, it really signals a change in how the administration was viewing these protests.
It wasn't just local crowd control anymore.
This was the federal government drawing a very clear, very sharp line in the sand.
Yeah, basically saying the Justice Department saw certain protest activities as, well, threats to domestic security.
Requiring overwhelming force and the full weight of federal prosecution.
That's the message.
Okay, so let's get into the action itself. This deployment directive from Bondi on Monday, what was the explicit goal?
It was non-negotiable, really. The stated intent was, and I'm quoting here, to protect ICE facilities, arrest violent agitators on the spot, and bring the strongest federal charges possible.
Strongest charges possible. Wow.
Yeah, and the overall theme she pushed was the rule of law will prevail.
Yeah.
It was about showing resolve.
And looking at the agencies called in makes that intent even clearer. It wasn't just DHS or local police.
No, not at all. This is where you see this massive federal mobilization. The directive ordered agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF.
Okay.
The U.S. Marshals Service.
Right.
The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA.
Wait, the DEA.
Really?
For protests outside immigration facilities.
And the FBI.
Injecting agencies focused on drug trafficking and organized crime into political protests. That's quite a statement.
It really speaks volumes about how they wanted to frame this, doesn't it? Sort of projecting this high level of threat of criminality onto the demonstrators.
Yeah, like using the ATF, DEA, FBI suggests they were framing this as needing resources usually saved for, like, major criminal operations.
Exactly. And the focus was on specific cities initially. Portland, Chicago.
And that catch-all other cities where protests had heated up.
Right.
And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was clearly tied to President Trump's rhetoric just the weekend before.
Oh, definitely. The sources explicitly link it to Trump saying he'd send troops to Portland. He described ICE facilities as, quote, under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists.
So the directive looks like a direct follow-through on that.
It does, and it was fast. The sources note Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker confirmed 100 troops were being readied for deployment to Illinois right around that time.
Okay, so massive deployment, direct presidential connection. How did they justify this? What was the big selling point, especially that quantitative claim?
Yeah. They led with a number designed to really grab attention. Bondi's memo cited a 1,000% increase in assaults on ICE officers since January 21.
1,000%. That sounds enormous.
It does. It immediately suggests a crisis, a huge spike in violence, regardless of what the actual baseline numbers might have been. It sets a tone.
And that statistic sets the stage. But the narrative strategy she used is also really interesting. It wasn't just about the protests themselves.
No, she explicitly linked the crackdown to what she called a new era of extreme political violence.
And she pulled in some incredibly diverse incidents to make that point, didn't she? Almost unrelated things.
That's right. To justify sending in agencies like the ATF and DEA, she listed 4 quite different events together.
Which were?
Okay, first, the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Second, attempted attacks on President Trump.
Okay.
Third, a school shooting in Minnesota. And fourth, the recent shooting at a Dallas immigration field office.
That is casting an incredibly wide net. You're linking street protests to political assassination, threats against the president, even a tragic school shooting.
Well, that's the effect, isn't it? It paints this picture of pervasive chaos, suggesting the protests are just one part of a much larger national security problem.
A problem only a massive federal response could handle.
That seems to be the function of listing them together. But we need to look really closely at the details the sources give us on that last incident, the Dallas shooting.
Okay, what's the crucial nuance there?
The sources are specific. In Dallas, a gunman killed 1 detainee and wounded 2 others inside the facility. He was Tragic, obviously.
Right.
But the source material explicitly points out, quote, no IC personnel were injured.
Ah, I see. And that detail matters
Because the whole justification for the directive, the memo, is framed around protecting federal personnel from violent protesters outside, including an internal incident where no ICE staff were actually hurt. Well, it helps build that narrative of chaos, even if the incident itself doesn't quite fit the main argument about protesters attacking agents.
that's a really important detail. It highlights the kind of selective messaging potentially used to back up these big federal actions.
Okay, let's pivot to the part that I think has the most direct impact for people involved in organizing or legal defense, the actual legal strategy.
Right. What were agents told to do on the ground?
Exactly. What was the mandate regarding arrests?
They were given pretty broad instructions. It was to suppress all unlawful rioting and arrest every person suspected of threatening or assaulting a federal law enforcement officer or interfering with operations.
Interfering with operations. That sounds like it could cover a lot of ground.
It's purposefully broad language, yes. Okay, so they make arrests. Then what? What were federal prosecutors, say, in Oregon and Illinois, told to do with those cases? They weren't aiming for minor charges.
No, definitely not. The direction was clear. Pursue the highest provable offense available under the law.
Highest provable offense. That signals no easy plea deals. Go for maximum penalties.
It's a clear institutional push for serious federal time, long sentences.
So what does this really mean legally? Because this is where the memo casts that exceptionally broad net we mentioned, going beyond just people caught being violent.
Yes, and this is the part you really need to understand if you're looking at the legal implications. Bondi explicitly wrote that charges would not be limited just to those individuals caught in the act of violence.
Okay, so who else could be targeted?
She wrote, and this is key, every person who aids, abets, or conspires to commit these crimes would also be prosecuted.
Aids, abets, or conspires. For our listeners who aren't lawyers, can you break that down? What does that practically mean for someone at a protest who wasn't violent?
It means the federal government could potentially charge you as if you did commit the violent act yourself, even if you were nowhere near it.
How?
Well, think about organizing. If you helped plan the rally, maybe arranged supplies, coordinated transport, anything like that, and then if someone else at that event assaults a federal officer, the prosecution could argue you conspired to make that crime happen just by facilitating the protest itself.
Wow. So facilitating the event is potentially conspiring to commit any crime that happens at the event.
That's the potential reach. It dramatically expands who could face serious federal charges. It's a powerful tool, to potentially deter organizers and dismantle support networks.
That absolutely changes the risk calculation for anyone thinking about organizing or even just showing up to a sustained demonstration.
Yeah.
You're potentially exposed to severe federal conspiracy charges.
That is precisely the aggressive legal posture they were taking. It seems aimed at the organizational structure behind the protests.
Okay, let's bring in some context and counterpoints. Obviously, an action this big sparks pushback. We know the protesters' side, they were denouncing raids, detentions, conditions inside ICE facilities.
Right, while the administration often labeled them violent rioters, that clash of definitions is central.
And civil liberties groups weighed in immediately.
Oh, yes. They were highly critical, arguing the administration was using excessive force and harsh federal charges against people exercising First Amendment rights.
But interestingly, not everyone saw this directive as something totally new or unprecedented. There was another perspective, right?
That's true. Journalist Chris Geidner, writing in his Law Dork newsletter, offered that nuance. He argued Bondi's directive represented more continuity rather than escalation.
Continuity. How so, if it felt so aggressive?
His point was that the federal government already had the legal authority, the statutes, to intervene and use force in these situations. The underlying power wasn't fundamentally new.
Okay, so if the power existed, why did this formal, very public directive cause so much alarm? Why are we even talking about it like this?
I think the alarm wasn't about whether the power existed on paper, but about the explicit, high-level mandate to use that power to its absolute maximum.
Ah, the instruction.
Exactly. Geidner highlighted that the specific instruction to pursue the highest provable offense and deliberately expand liability through conspiracy charges, that was the recipe for guaranteed overreach.
So his takeaway wasn't that it was illegal, but that it was dangerous.
Pretty much. His advice to the public was basically, watch closely how this gets implemented and be ready to push back against the inevitable overreach.
Okay, that brings us back to the core conflict here. On one side, you have this rapid, multi-agency federal deployment, justified with these stark claims of rising violence. That 1,000% number.
Right. And on the other side, you have critics seeing it as a formal, aggressive move that threatens civil liberties and needs intense scrutiny.
So the takeaway is really about the marshaling of resources.
I think so. The administration used basically every tool it had: the political rhetoric from the top, the attention-grabbing statistics, selective examples of violence, and then this maximum legal mandate.
It wasn't just about crowd control.
It seems it was about deploying overwhelming physical and legal force, potentially aimed at undermining the very infrastructure supporting ongoing political dissent.
Which leads us to that final point, the one for you, our listener, to really consider. We talked about the directive targeting anyone who aids, abets, or conspires.
Yeah, think about the long-term implications of embedding conspiracy charges so explicitly into the response to political protests.
What kind of precedent could that set?
Well, it potentially changes the game for organized dissent. It extends liability way beyond any physical action. Does that broad interpretation of complicity start to blur the line under federal law?
Blurring the line between organizing a protest and conspiring to commit a federal crime.
Potentially, yes. It raises the question: could the very act of organizing itself carry the risk of federal criminal charges, even for peaceful participants, depending on how authorities choose to interpret events?
A truly provocative thought. That line between legitimate organizing and conspiracy, and who gets to draw it. Thanks for helping us unpack the details of this directive today.
My pleasure. Understanding the specific language, the justifications used in these federal actions, it's really the first step to grasping their full impact.